something is happening to you, not around you, not in your life, inside you. You may not have the words for it yet. You may have tried to explain it to someone close to you and felt the words collapse before they even formed. But you feel it. You've been feeling it for a while now. Something that used to feel solid no longer does. Something that used to be enough. The routines, the plans, the version of yourself you had agreed to be no longer fits the way it once did. And the strange part is, you can't go back. Even if you try, you are not sick. You are not losing your mind. You are not broken. But something is changing. And the world around you, the doctors, the therapists, the people who care about you, does not seem to have a name for it that actually feels true. They will tell you it is stress. They will tell you it is anxiety. They will tell you it is a phase, something to manage, something to fix, something to wait out. But something in you, something very quiet, very deep, and very certain, knows that none of those words are right, because what is happening to you is not a malfunction. It doesn't feel like something breaking. It feels like something arriving. And you felt that too, that subtle sense that something is getting closer, something you can't explain, something you can't see yet. But you know it's there, because what is happening to you is not random. It is a process, a precise, ancient, extraordinarily well-documented process that human beings have been passing through for thousands of years. The Sufi tradition called it Hal, a state that arrives without warning and transforms everything. The Vedic tradition called it Vairagya, the fading of meaning from the surface of life. The Christian mystics called it the dark night of the soul. Different names, same experience. And here is what no one told you. The discomfort you feel is not a side effect. It is the process, the confusion, the instability, the sense that something is dissolving. Those are not signs that something went wrong. They are the first signs that something is finally changing. And something in you already knows this. You can feel it, that sense that you cannot stay where you were, but you don't yet know where you're going. And that is because you have crossed a threshold, a process that the modern world has almost completely forgotten how to recognize. Tonight we are going to remember. Let us begin with what the ancient world actually knew. Because the first thing you need to understand is this. What you are experiencing right now is not new. It is not a product of modern stress, modern technology, or the particular difficulties of the world you live in. Human beings have been passing through this exact experience. This specific quality of inner disruption, of things coming loose, of the self no longer fitting its old container, for as long as there have been human beings. And the ancient traditions did not treat it as a problem. They treated it as a threshold. The Sufi tradition of Islam called this experience Hal, a state, a visitation, something that arrives without being planned, without being invited, that temporarily dissolves the ordinary structures of the self and leaves the person in a condition of radical openness. The great Sufi poet Rumi wrote almost exclusively about this experience. The reed cut from the reed bed, the lover separated from the beloved, the human being who suddenly finds that the life they were living is no longer enough. Rumi did not write about this as tragedy. He wrote about it as the beginning. The Vedic tradition of ancient India called a similar experience Vairagya, the fading of colour from the things of the world, the moment when the objects, the relationships, the achievements that once seemed to promise fulfillment suddenly seem to promise nothing, not because they have become bad, but because something in you has grown too large for them to contain. The Christian mystical tradition called it the dark night of the soul, a period of interior desolation in which everything that seemed to be meaning seems to withdraw, not as punishment, as preparation. What are you being prepared for? We will get there. But first you need to understand something that none of these traditions will let you skip. The discomfort you are feeling is not incidental to the process. It is the process. The dissolution of what no longer fits is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is the first sign that something is going profoundly, irreversibly right. And this is something the ancient world understood with a precision that we have almost entirely lost. They did not just name this experience. They mapped it. They built entire schools around it. In ancient Egypt, the mystery schools of Memphis and Heliopolis trained initiates for years, sometimes decades, specifically to navigate the territory you are in right now. Not to avoid it, not to shorten it, but to move through it consciously, with understanding, with the knowledge of what was happening and why. Because the Egyptian masters knew something that the modern world has forgotten entirely. A human being who crosses this threshold without understanding suffers unnecessarily. They fight what cannot be fought. They grieve what does not need to be grieved. They try to hold together what is meant to come apart. But a human being who crosses it with understanding becomes something they could not have become any other way. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who lived 2,500 years ago and whose fragments still carry more compressed wisdom than most modern books, wrote something that has stayed with me. He said, "You cannot step into the same river twice, not because the river changes, but because you change. And the person standing at the threshold tonight is not the same person who stood there a year ago. Something in you has already moved. Something in you already knows that the river has changed. And the only question now is whether you will step in." There is a map. This is perhaps the most important thing to say to someone in the middle of what you are going through. Not a vague map, not a poetic metaphor for a map. An actual detailed, cross-culturally verified map of the inner territory you are currently navigating. Drawn independently by traditions that never spoke to each other across thousands of years of human experience. And the fact that they all drew the same map is not a coincidence. It is evidence. The map has three broad territories. The first territory is the ordinary life, the life of the unexamined self, the life in which you inhabit the identity that was built for you by your family, your culture, your history, your wounds, without yet knowing that it is built. Most human beings live their entire lives in this first territory and never know there is anything beyond it. The second territory is the threshold, the in-between, the place you're in right now. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition has a precise word for this space: bardo, a transitional state, a gap between what was and what has not yet arrived. The Tibetan masters were extraordinarily precise about the bardo. They mapped it in detail, described its characteristics, its dangers, its opportunities. and the specific errors of mind that cause a person to suffer unnecessarily within it. The primary error, according to the Tibetan masters, is this: trying to get back to the first territory, trying to reassemble what has come apart, trying to make the old self fit again. This is the source of most of the suffering that people experience during what they call a spiritual crisis, a breakdown, a dark night. Not the dissolution itself, the resistance to dissolution. The third territory is what the traditions call variously awakening, liberation, gnosis, enlightenment, union, the return. Not a destination in the future, not a reward for sufficient suffering, but a recognition of what has always been true about you, obscured by the layers of constructed identity, that the threshold experience is often painfully, always necessarily stripping away. You are being prepared for this recognition. That is what is happening to you. Now let us talk about the specific signs, because one of the most disorienting aspects of this experience is that it does not arrive with a label. It does not come with instructions. And because the modern world has lost the language for it, most people going through it interpret each individual symptom in isolation as a problem to be solved, rather than recognizing the whole pattern as a single coherent process. So let us name the pattern. The first sign is a loss of interest in things that used to matter. Not depression, though it can feel like depression from the outside. But there is a quality to this particular loss of interest that is different from the flatness of clinical depression. It is more like outgrowing, like trying to wear clothes from 10 years ago and finding that they simply no longer fit. Not because you have failed, but because you have grown. The Vedic tradition called this the arising of Vairagya, discrimination. The sudden, involuntary capacity to perceive the difference between what is real and what is merely appearing to be real. The second sign is heightened sensitivity. Things that never used to affect you now affect you deeply. Cruelty that you once moved past without difficulty now stays with you for days. Beauty that you once appreciated mildly now sometimes stops you completely. This is not weakness. This is the thinning of what the ancient Hermetic tradition called the veil, the protective layer of ordinary consciousness that keeps the full weight of reality at a manageable distance. The third sign is the questions, the ones that arrive at 3 a.m. and will not leave, the ones that make the people around you uncomfortable when you try to voice them. Who am I really? Not the name, not the role, not the story, but what is actually here behind all of that. What is the point of this? What is life actually for? These questions are not symptoms of a disturbed mind. They are symptoms of a mind that is beginning to wake up. The fourth sign, and this one is perhaps the most important, is the sense of something approaching. Not threat, not danger, something else, a sense of imminence, of something large moving closer, of a life that is somehow more real than the one you have been living, waiting just on the other side of something you have not yet crossed. The ancient traditions would recognize this immediately. It is the approach of what you actually are, and it is getting closer. Now, here is something that almost no one tells you about these signs. They do not arrive in a straight line. Some days you will feel clarity, a sudden, inexplicable sense that everything is exactly as it should be. that something is moving in the right direction, even though you cannot see where it leads. And then the next day, the confusion returns. The questions come back louder. The ground feels unstable again. The sense of loss returns without warning, and the untrained mind, the mind without a map, interprets this as failure, as regression, as evidence that nothing is actually changing. But the Sufi masters described this movement precisely. They called it the breath of the merciful, a rhythm of expansion and contraction that is not a sign of instability but of life. A heart that never contracts is not beating. A lung that never empties cannot receive new air. What feels like regression is often the deepest part of the process. The moment just before something shifts permanently. The Zen tradition has a specific name for this moment. They call it the dark before dawn, not metaphorically, literally. The practitioners who have gone the furthest in this territory consistently report that the most disorienting, most destabilizing, most difficult passage comes just before the opening. So if tonight feels harder than last week, that is not a sign that you are going backwards. It may be the most important sign of all. Keep going. Let us talk about why the modern world lost the map, because this is not a small question. And the answer matters, not just intellectually, but personally, for anyone going through what we are describing tonight. The map was lost in stages. The first stage was the disenchantment of the world. The world that had once been understood as saturated with presence, with intelligence, with a living depth that responded to human attention, was gradually reframed as a collection of objects, measurable, predictable, ultimately meaningless, except for the meanings human beings chose to project onto them. This was in many ways a genuine advance. The scientific method has produced real knowledge, real medicine, real understanding of the physical world. But it came at a cost. The cost was the interior map. Because the experiences we have been describing tonight, the threshold, the dissolution of the constructed self, the approach of what the traditions called the deeper self. These experiences do not show up on an MRI. They cannot be replicated in a laboratory. And so the modern world, lacking a framework for them, defaults to the only categories it has: pathology, dysfunction, crisis, something to be fixed. The second stage of the loss was the institutionalization of religion. The traditions that carried the interior map were in many cases deliberately marginalized or absorbed into institutional forms that preserve the outer shell of the practice while quietly emptying it of its most essential contents. What institutional religion offered instead was belief, doctrine, the acceptance of certain propositions about reality as a substitute for the direct investigation of reality. And belief, however sincere, cannot navigate the threshold. You cannot believe your way through a dark night of the soul. The third stage is the acceleration of distraction. The modern attention economy has created, for the first time in human history, a system specifically designed to prevent the kind of stillness in which the threshold announces itself. The notifications, the feeds, the endless availability of stimulation precisely calibrated to keep your attention moving forward, never inward. Until the moment many of you watching this will recognize, when the postponement is no longer possible, when the stillness arrives anyway, when something comes loose that cannot be pushed back in. That moment is not a breakdown. It is a breakthrough trying to happen. Now we come to the most practical part of this conversation. Because knowing that you are on a threshold, knowing that what you are experiencing has a name, a map, and a long history of human beings who have passed through it and come out the other side is important. But it is not enough. The question is, how do you navigate it? The ancient traditions were not vague about this. They were extraordinarily specific. And across traditions, separated by centuries and continents, certain navigational principles appear again and again with such consistency that they cannot be dismissed as cultural coincidence. The first principle is stop trying to fix it. This is the hardest instruction for the modern mind to receive. Because the modern mind is a problem-solving mind. It has been trained from earliest childhood to identify discomfort as error and to move immediately toward its correction. But the threshold is not an error. The Zen tradition has a phrase for the moment when a student finally stops fighting the process. They call it the great surrender. Not surrender in the sense of defeat. Surrender in the sense of a soldier finally laying down a weapon he has been carrying so long he has forgotten it is a weapon, and discovering that his hands, now empty, are finally free. The second principle is find the silence. Not silence as the absence of sound. Silence as the withdrawal of attention from the surface of experience into the deeper layer beneath them. Every tradition has a practice for this. Meditation in the Buddhist and Vedic traditions. Contemplative prayer in the Christian tradition. Muraqabah in the Sufi tradition. Zazen in the Zen tradition. Even 20 minutes a day of genuine stillness begins to change the quality of the threshold experience. It begins to transform it from something happening to you into something you are consciously participating in. The third principle is trust what is falling away. The Sufi tradition has a concept for what happens when these things fall away. They call it fana, a word that means annihilation or passing away. But in the Sufi understanding, fana is not loss. It is clarification. The burning away of what was never essentially you, so that what is essentially you can finally be seen. The fourth principle is the hardest to hear and the most important. You're not doing this alone. The human beings who have navigated this territory and come back with their maps intact, who are alive right now in communities and lineages and quiet corners of the world that have preserved these technologies, are not legends. They are available. And one of the functions of a channel like this one is to help people who are standing at the threshold find their way toward those who can walk it with them. There is one more thing that needs to be said, and it is perhaps the thing that the modern world has most completely removed from the conversation about inner transformation. The ancient traditions did not believe that this process was meant to be navigated alone. Not because human beings are too weak to face it alone, but because the threshold has always been a place of transmission. In the Tibetan tradition, the teacher does not simply teach. The teacher accompanies. There is a word in Tibetan, Kalyanamitra, which means spiritual friend, not a guru in the sense of someone who holds authority over you, but a human being who has crossed the territory you are crossing and who walks beside you while you cross it. In the Sufi tradition, the same role exists. The sheikh is not simply a teacher of doctrine. He is living presence, someone whose own crossing was complete enough that their company itself becomes a kind of navigation. Even in the earliest Christian tradition, before the institutionalization of the church, this role existed. The desert fathers and mothers of the Egyptian and Syrian deserts were sought out specifically for this purpose, not for theology, for accompaniment, for someone to say, I have been where you are. I know what this looks like. And I can tell you from the other side of it that what you are experiencing is real and it leads somewhere. You may not yet have found that person in your own life, but the fact that you are here watching this suggests that something in you is already looking, and what looks eventually finds. If you have stayed with us through this entire conversation tonight, if what we have been describing has landed somewhere real in you, has touched something that you recognized even before you had words for it, then I want to say something directly to you. What you are going through is real, not a phase, not a malfunction, not something to be waited out or medicated away or explained as the product of stress and insufficient self-care. Real, ancient, recognized, mapped. You are not the first human being to stand where you are standing tonight. You are not even close to the first. And every single human being who has stood where you are standing, who has felt the ground shift beneath the life they thought they were living, who has heard the questions that will not be quieted, every one of them faced the same choice: to turn back toward what was familiar, or to cross. The ones who crossed found on the other side not what they feared. They did not find emptiness or loss or the destruction of everything they valued. They found more reality, not less, more capacity, not less, more love, not the conditional, contracted love of the ordinary self, but something larger, steadier, less dependent on circumstances, remaining comfortable. At Sacred Flame, this is the territory we explore every week, not from the outside as curious observers of ancient traditions, but as people who believe, who are increasingly certain that what these traditions discovered about the nature of human consciousness is not merely historically interesting, it is urgently, practically relevant right now to the world you're living in, to the experience you may be having at this very moment. If this conversation matters to you, subscribe, not for the numbers, but because the sequence matters. Each video builds on what came before. And share this with someone who needs it. You know who they are, the person in your life who has been trying to describe something they cannot name, who has been looking slightly lost in a way that is different from ordinary lost. Send this to them, not as a recommendation, as a message. I see what is happening to you, and there is a map. We began tonight by saying, something is happening to you. Let us end by saying something more. You are not a passive recipient of this process. You are not something that is being done to, a person at the mercy of forces they cannot understand or influence. You are at the deepest level, the level that the ancient traditions were pointing toward, when they used words like Atman and Ak and Rigpa and the kingdom of God. Within the process itself, nothing is wrong with you. Something is right with you that has not yet had a chance to fully express itself. The dissolution you are experiencing is not the destruction of who you are. It is the destruction of who you were told you were. And beneath that, beneath the constructed identity, beneath the accumulated story, beneath the particular shape that fear and love and experience and loss have given to the self you have inhabited. There is something that has never been damaged. The Upanishads call it Satchitananda, being, consciousness, bliss. Not three qualities of a distant God. Three facets of what you actually are at your most fundamental level. The Christian mystics called it the ground of the soul, the place in you that, as Meister Eckhart wrote, was never born and will never die. The Tibetan masters called it Rigpa, the naked luminous awareness that is the basis of all experience. And that has been present unchanged through every moment of your life, including and especially the hardest ones. You have felt it, not in the moments of achievement or pleasure, in the moments of absolute stillness, in the moments between thoughts, in the moments when something so beautiful or so devastating arrived that the ordinary self fell quiet and something else, something larger, steadier, more real, was simply there. That is what is approaching. That is what the threshold is clearing space for. And the only navigational instruction that every tradition, in every language, across every century, has agreed upon is this: do not turn back. Keep moving toward what is real. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are exactly where the ancient masters said you would be when the time came. And the time for you has come. Until next time, stay awake.